Hi, everybody. So today we are going to do an introduction to immigration. This is our new social studies unit, and as this unit goes on, you're going to end up focusing on one specific country and learning about why people immigrated from that country to America. But today we're just going to talk about immigration in general and some of the big reasons people moved and what it was like for them when they came to America. So we're going to focus on the time period of the late 1800s and early 1900s, and during this time, millions of people immigrated to America. And immigrating means that people left their lives in their home country and came to America to live here permanently. They weren't visiting, they weren't on a trip, their intention was to completely relocate their lives. In a lot of cases, people left almost everything that they owned behind when they moved. The passage to America, in order to get to America, was quite expensive. As you can see from this picture, they arrived on boats, so people were not flying, they were traveling on boats, and the tickets were pricey. So a lot of times people sold many of their belongings in order to afford the tickets. Sometimes one person from a family would go ahead because they didn't have enough money to pay for everybody to go. They would go ahead, maybe get a job and earn some money, send the money back, and then more members of their family could arrive. They didn't bring more than they could carry with them. They could only bring what they could carry onto the ship. So even personal items and clothing, they didn't bring a lot of. Huge crowds of people arrived in America every day. You can see in this image how crowded the ships are. There were tons and tons of people every day arriving, and they came from all over the world, and they came for many different reasons. So some of the big reasons why people moved to America. America was known, especially in Europe and other parts of the world, as the land of opportunity. People believed that there were lots and lots of jobs here. Part of that was a result of the Industrial Revolution, which had created a lot of new jobs. People also knew that America was pretty big and there was a lot of land in America, so they thought that perhaps there was more land for farming than in their own country. So a lot of times people came to America because they thought they would be able to get rich here. They thought they would be able to be successful here. Another reason is that people were looking for religious freedom. In America, you were allowed to be any religion that you chose. There were no laws about what religion you had to be. That was not the case in other countries. So some people in other countries were a religion that they were being told they couldn't practice. And so they wanted to come to America because they knew in America they could practice their own religion. And a third major reason is that sometimes there were things going on in their home country that they wanted to leave. Perhaps there was a war going on and they didn't feel like they were safe and they wanted to leave. Or perhaps there was famine. Famine means widespread hunger, when there's just not enough food for people. And if that was happening in their country, they knew they had to leave in order to survive. So those are some of the big reasons why people moved to America. A lot of people traveled to America on ship. That's how everybody got here, but many of them came through Ellis Island, which is in New York. You might have even visited it. It's near the Statue of Liberty. You can go there and go on a tour. It's pretty neat. And this was a place where everybody who wanted to come to America had to stop before actually getting to the city or actually getting to America. When they got there, they had to go through medical and oral tests. So the medical tests were given by doctors, and doctors were checking to see that people were healthy. They didn't want to let people into America that they believed to be sick. They also would ask them questions in order to kind of understand if they had some money. They wanted people who were coming to America to have a little bit of money so that they would be able to afford an apartment or a place to live. And they also wanted to know if you were able to work. They wanted to make sure that you were going to come to America, you were going to be able to get a job. This got complicated because people were coming from all over the world speaking different languages. Many people did not speak English. And there were some interpreters, but there weren't interpreters for every language. So it was definitely really challenging for people when they arrived here. It was probably very scary and very overwhelming to go through all of these tests. Some people did not pass for multitudes of reasons, and a lot of those people were sent home. So not everybody that stopped at Ellis Island was actually allowed to go through to America. If the people there felt like they were sick, or they weren't able to work, or they didn't have money, or they didn't have a plan for who they were going to stay with, sometimes they sent them back to their home country. So once they got here, most immigrants ended up living in tenements, which we talked a little bit about last week. Tenements were very, very crowded, very small apartments. Sometimes, an entire family with 4 or 5 kids would be living in a one-bedroom apartment where everything was very close together because that was what they could afford. They didn't have a lot of money, as we talked about. They probably sold most of their belongings in order to get here, so they probably didn't have a lot of money on them. There were jobs, but the pay was very poor and the work conditions were terrible. You learned a little bit about the work conditions last week. People took advantage of immigrants. They knew that if you were an immigrant, you potentially really needed the money and you would probably work for not that much money. So they weren't paid very much. They also knew you probably wouldn't complain about the work conditions because you really needed the job. So there wasn't a lot of motivation for the people that ran the factories or were in charge of the jobs to pay people well or to make the work conditions good. So it was a really difficult life. Those jobs were really difficult and you weren't getting paid a lot of money. Sometimes instead of working in a factory, families would work out of their apartments. So in addition to living in this very small apartment, sometimes they would be sewing clothes or doing a job that they could do at home. A lot of times the children worked instead of going to school. We mentioned that last week. The children were working in factories or working at home, and that was just because they needed that money. They needed the income, and so the children would work instead of going to school. As you can imagine, there was definitely a language barrier for a lot of immigrants. A lot of immigrants came to America not knowing any English, so it was challenging for them to communicate with the people that had been living here and did speak English. They were discriminated against often, and because of all of this, a lot of times immigrants clustered together and they lived with other people who spoke their language and were from the same country they were from so that they could keep some of their cultural traditions alive. And that's why we still today have parts of New York City, like Little Italy, that are known to be Italian because a lot of Italian immigrants ended up living in that area. So that really helped them to feel a little bit more like it was home when they could find people that they could easily communicate with and share some of those favorite foods or favorite traditions with. So now your assignment for today, based on the information that you read in this video, I want you to take some notes to answer the two major questions that we talked about. Why did people immigrate to the United States? So what are some of the reasons that people immigrated? And then also, what was life like for them when they arrived? You can go back and watch the video again. You can pause it at certain points so that you can see the slides and hear what I'm saying and take some notes answering those two questions. The next 2 days, we're going to have some fun projects for you to get to think even more about what this experience might have been like for people. So stay tuned.